Ash drifted like snow through the ruptured sky, lightless and slow, as if gravity had forgotten which way was down. The boy was still alive. Sera knew it before her mind did. Not from scanners, those were gone, slagged in the last pulse, but from the aching hollowness in her chest that cracked wider with every heartbeat. She crouched over the obsidian ledge of what used to be Deck 12 of the human arc ship Vigilance, now a twisted spinal remnant of hull floating through an imploded pocket of multiversal entropy. The screams had stopped hours ago, or minutes. Time no longer obeyed here. But she felt him. She felt him. "Don't move," came a voice, cold, sexless, threaded with synthetic distortion. Sera didn't flinch. She tilted her head just enough to glimpse the silhouette reflected in the warped plating ahead. Tall, ultra-thin, limbs too long. A Seraphim-class observer drone, marked with the insignia of the Ascendancy, one of theirs. She spoke calmly, voice a razor behind velvet. "If you shoot me, observer, the node dies with me." Pause, just enough to reveal uncertainty. "You are compromised, emotionally unviable. You risk event instability." "No," she whispered, rising slowly, her boots crackling on the frost-slick metal. "I am the instability." The drone shifted, shoulder-mounted weapon arming with a gentle hiss. But Sera had already closed the gap. The blade wasn't elegant, just sharpened carbon steel etched with burn lines and grief. She drove it into the observer's cranial node, twisting as its chassis spasmed, and dumped a distorted shriek into the static-written void. Its collapse echoed down the corridor, vanishing into the ruptured silence. Sera exhaled, then kept moving. Every step took her deeper into the collapsed midsection of Vigilance, where reality flickered like a corrupted feed, gravity vectors twitching, corridors looping into themselves, air pressure cycling violently with every heartbeat of the singularity core below. The multiverse had begun unraveling here, and she was at the center of it, because of him, because of the boy. They told her he wasn't real, that he was a cognitive parasite, that the grief was weaponized, a viral construct seeded into her by the Ascendancy to keep her tethered to an obsolete dimension. But she remembered his breath on her neck during the last sleep cycle, the sound of his laugh when they outran the fold storm in Sector 9, the way he said her name like it was something he had created. You can't simulate that, not even with a quantum-layered psi-fork, not without a soul. She descended into the core chamber. Lights flickered violently, half in infrared, half in ultraviolet tones the human brain wasn't meant to interpret. Every step painted after-images on her retina. Every second bent the trajectory of thought. And there he was, small, fragile, curled inside the protection matrix of a memory cocoon, the last stable emotional construct inside a ship devoured by multiversal entropy. His chest rose, slowly. His fingers twitched in REM, but he didn't wake. "You stayed," said a voice behind her. Sera froze. The tone, too familiar. She turned and came face to face with herself. Older, eyes sunken, one arm replaced with Ascendancy nanoware, a scar slicing down her cheek like a question mark that never found an answer. "Time fractured," the older said, voice graveled with exhaustion. "You didn't make it, not in most threads. You're a divergence?" Sera stepped backward, instinct screaming. A correction. The other Sera stared past her, at the boy. "He doesn't belong in any timeline. You should have let him go." Sera's jaw clenched. He is the timeline. A silence thick as collapsing gravity passed between them. "Do you know what you've done?" the older said. "Every multiverse node, every alternate thread where you held on, they all began to fall apart. He's an anchor dragging every reality into singular collapse." "No," Sera said, stepping between her older self and the cocoon. "He's a core. He's what makes us human." The older Sera raised a hand. A pulse detonated from her palm, freezing space around Sera's legs, locking her in a lattice of quantum stasis. "He's not real, Sera. He was never born. You invented him." The cocoon flickered. The boy moved. The universe screamed. A rift tore open above the core, raw white noise stitched with voices from fractured timelines. Echoes of Sera begging, screaming, killing. 100 selves fighting for the right to mourn. Sera's stasis cracked. She surged forward as her older self fired again. Energy sheared past, but too slow. Sera reached the cocoon. Her hand pressed against the glass. The boy opened his eyes and said, "You're not the first one to save me." The chamber detonated in cascading waves of chronospatial inversion. The ship inverted, the core ruptured, and somewhere, in a place no longer bound by cause or effect, a child's voice whispered, "You broke everything to keep me alive." Sera's scream became the scream of the multiverse itself as timelines snapped like brittle glass. And then, everything went black. Light returned as a sound, wet, distorted, pulsing with static grief. Not a sun, not a flare, a heartbeat rendered visible through fractured dimensions. Sera lay suspended in a gravityless lattice, her breath fogging against a membrane that was not air, not vacuum, but something in between, a gelatinous viscosity of ruptured timeline threads. Around her swirled debris from 1,000 realities, a wedding ring frozen mid-spin, a child's drawing curled in fire, a cracked ascendancy visor reflecting a dead Earth she'd never seen. Then, pain. Memory reattached to body. She spasmed, coughed, and vomited light. It spilled out of her mouth like spilt code, pulsing with half-formed symbols and timelines aborted mid-sentence. "You survived it," whispered a voice in her skull. She blinked. A new voice, not hers, not the boy's, not ascendancy, but older. "We didn't think you would." She turned her head slowly and found herself face to face with the impossible. It wasn't a person. It wasn't even a being. It was a presence that folded space inward around it, an absence shaped like intent. Every part of her brain screamed that it couldn't exist, that its form violated curvature constants, that it bent the very semantic architecture of perception. "You're the architect?" she rasped. "That name is inaccurate, but permitted." The entity shimmered. No up, no down, just recursive motion, like watching grief loop on itself. "You were watching," she said. "When the core ruptured? No, we were formed by the rupture." A pause. Time thickened, then thinned. Her body ached with contradictions. "We are the boundary between possible and impossible, the threshold of collapse, the end condition. You broke the multiverse, Sera, but you also opened us." She stared at it, her knuckles white around the blade she hadn't realized she still held. "Where's the boy?" "Everywhere now." "No," she said. "No, no, don't give me riddles. Give me my son." The word dropped like a flare into deep water. The entity pulsed. "He was never your son." Sera's voice cracked. "He chose me. Doesn't that make it real enough?" Another presence entered the fold. It shimmered into being like a mirror forged from all her wrong decisions. Hair shorter, eyes wrong, uniform crisp with ascendancy seals. Commander Sera Vail of Threadline 0. "Oh God," Sera whispered, "not again." The mirror Vail stepped forward, face unreadable. "You were infected," she said flatly, "with a grief construct designed to test the emotional bandwidth of human hosts. It was an ascendancy experiment, Project Echofall. The boy was never real. He was an interface, a virus wearing the mask of love." "No," Sera said. "He had memories. He remembered things I forgot." "That was the test," Mirror Vail said, "to see if humans would protect the lie at the expense of reality. You failed." Sera lunged, She struck first this time, blade against carbon armor, sparks lighting the void as two versions of the same soul collided across dimensional fracture. Sera Vail parried, kicked her backward, voice calm even as blood slicked her jaw. "You're not special, Sera. You're a recursion, one of thousands." "I don't care." Sera's breath steamed in the vacuum that shouldn't be breathable. "I'll destroy every version of myself that tells me to forget him." Sera Vail hesitated. It was slight, but enough. Sera drove the blade through her doppelganger's abdomen, twisting until the other woman gasped and fell. Her eyes flickered like faulty implants, grief rippling through the cracks of command conditioning. "I remember what it felt like," Sera Vail whispered, "when he hugged me, before I erased him." Then she dissolved, not into death, into light. Timeline energy ripped from her form in spiraling arcs, feeding into the surrounding rift space like an emotional bloodletting. Sera watched it swirl upward until it met something. A silhouette. Small, barefoot, eyes wide with multiversal light. The boy stood at the intersection of 1,000 collapsing versions of reality, his hair flickering through styles, his clothes shifting through time periods, ancient linen to synthetic armor to nakedness itself, then back again. But his eyes never changed. "Sera," he said. She dropped the blade. Her legs gave out. He stepped forward, knelt, touched her face. And for 1 second, one pure second, the universe paused. He whispered, "You were the only one who didn't erase me." "I couldn't," she said, voice breaking. "I loved you." "I know," he smiled. And then the rift pulsed, a warning. The architect's voice returned, low and thunderous. "This is the moment of choice. Let him go, or let everything else die." She looked around. Flashes of Earth, of Mars, of colonies long dead, of other versions of herself, some brave, some broken, some monstrous. She saw a version where she let him go, felt the ache, but also the restoration. She saw another where she clung tighter, and the multiverse screamed until even light couldn't escape the wound. She looked at him, his hand in hers. Real or not, he was the only anchor she had. "I choose him," she said, and the universe cracked wide open. The choice detonated across realities like a star going supernova with intention. In the instant Sera chose the boy, a cascading reaction ignited in the understructure of the multiverse, an impossible chain of cause preceding effect, as if her defiance traveled backward through time, rewriting the architectures meant to contain her. Across 1 trillion timelines, the laws of probability hiccuped. Constants flickered. Species that had never existed began to dream. Entropy got confused, and the ascendancy noticed. Sera didn't see it at first, just the tremor, subtle like the taste of blood on wind that hasn't yet started to fall. Then sound, not one she heard, but felt, bone deep, spinal, like a warning built into human DNA by some ancient, terrified ancestor. The sky above them inverted. What had been a bleeding lattice of timelines stitched with entropy became geometry, massive, angular, impossible. A throne that wasn't a throne, descending from a place that wasn't space. "They found us," the boy whispered. Sera turned, already shielding him with her body, already calculating exits in a place that had no physical up, no viable out. From the throne descended the entity. It wasn't a ship, it wasn't alive, but it thought. 12 wings of mirrored light, each inscribed with fractal logic glyphs that folded language into physics. Its face, a smooth obsidian oval, reflected only what it destroyed. It spoke in frequencies that caused lesser minds to collapse into recursive madness. "You have unmade the axiom." Sera's eardrums bled, Her teeth hummed in her skull. She stood straighter. "You made the axiom," she said, spitting blood. "I just stopped believing in it." The entity hovered, then a ripple, a cascade of smaller presences, drone-like fragments descending from the wings like seraphic wasps, each trailing threads of timeline corrective energy. These were the Eidolon Reclaimers, enforcers of multiversal symmetry. Their mandate was absolute: erase contradiction, overwrite divergence, restore the lie. One landed before her. It reached for the boy. Sera moved, faster than thought, faster than reason, because she was no longer bound to a single causality. She had chosen against all logic, and that made her dangerous. The blade was gone, but her memory of using it remained. And in this place, memory was weapon. She remembered driving a blade through the Reclaimer's chest, and so it was. It froze, convulsed, shattered into dust made of failed timelines. The entity watched. "You have become a node." Sera blinked. Her nose began to bleed again. She was holding too many threads, too many versions of herself in paradoxical cohesion. But the boy, he was calm. "I'm stabilizing you," he said. "For now." Sera stared at him. "What are you?" "I don't know," he said softly, "but I remember being loved before I existed." She felt it in her bones then. He wasn't the virus. He was the side effect. A ghost generated by the friction between infinite versions of her refusing to forget a child that never was. He was grief, dreaming itself real. The multiverse had tried to contain that grief, to render it harmless, and had failed. "Why does the entity care?" she asked, eyes locked on the throne. The boy looked down. "Because I'm proof they can't erase everything." The throne moved. Reality shifted, every axis bending, flattening, then rotating back upon itself. They were inside the entity now, held in a non-space of mathematical execution, every thought on trial. And then another voice entered. Not divine, not synthetic, human. "You're not alone, Sera." It came from behind her. She turned and saw a man step forward, rising from a collapsed timeline fragment, dark skin, cropped hair, hollow eyes. His coat bore Earth's last flag. His name was etched into her brain like a scar. "Elian Voss," she breathed. "You died." "In most threads," he replied, "but the ones where you chose to remember him, I stayed, I watched." He looked at the boy, then at her. "We were wrong," Elian said. "The human brain isn't too fragile for multiversal traversal. It's the only thing strong enough." "You shouldn't be able to access this plane," the entity thundered. Elian smiled, bitter and slow. "You forgot the one constant you can't predict." The boy looked up, eyes glowing now with stitched fragments of infinite possibility. Love. The entity screamed, not sound, but collapse. The void began to twist inward, compressing around them, trying to erase the moment, this defiant convergence. Sera grabbed the boy. Ilian reached for her. They linked. And in that instant, a singularity formed, not of matter, but of emotion. A black hole of memory, gravitationally attracting every forgotten version of the boy, every fragment of grief orphaned in fractured minds, every erased possibility where someone, somewhere, had chosen to care. It wasn't logic. It wasn't war. It was a rebellion of meaning. The entity fractured, wings tearing, core trembling, feedback shrieking across the recursive lattice of multiversal order. And from the throne spilled a new shape, humanoid, flickering. Another Sera. No, not another. The first. The prime thread origin point. And her eyes were on fire. "You think this is about one boy?" Prime Sera said, stepping forward. "This was never about him." She looked directly at the entity as it unraveled. "It's about us." Every time you tried to erase what made us human, every time you called it a virus, a flaw, an instability, you didn't understand. She grinned, wild and cracked. It was the weapon all along. The entity shattered, and the multiverse bled. The multiverse didn't explode, it exhaled. The sound was not destruction, but relief. A long-suppressed breath released from the lungs of a cosmos held in artificial stillness. The entity's throne fragmented in slow, impossible geometry, curling like burning paper in reverse. Shattered laws folded inward. Dimensional scaffolding collapsed into rain, not water, memory. It fell in pulses of recollection, forgotten names, unlived lives, moments unchosen. Sera felt each drop strike her skin and vanish into her bloodstream. The boy didn't flinch. Prime Sera stepped forward, and for the first time, Sera could see it. This version of her bore the weight of origin. Her movements were heavier, voice quieter, her eyes a timeline's worth of sacrifice behind them. "You survived the recursion threshold," Prime Sera said. "That makes you an anchor. They can't erase you anymore." Sera shook her head. "I don't want to be an anchor. I want him to live." Prime Sera studied her. "He is living, because you held on." "But he isn't real," Sera said. "He's a fragment, a consequence. Reality isn't binary anymore. It's quantum grief." The act of choosing made him real. The boy looked up at both Seras. "I'm scared." Sera knelt, cradling him. "So am I." Above them, the remnants of the entity flickered. The Ascendancy's God machine wasn't gone. It was adapting, reconstructing itself with new parameters. That was always their strength, not invincibility, but the illusion of permanence. Ilian stepped between them in the rising structure, scanning with an interface embedded deep in his wrist. "They're rebuilding the lattice," he muttered, "but differently, faster. They're learning from the collapse," Prime Sera added grimly. "They always do." "What are they building now?" "A containment sphere," Ilian said. "Not for space, for emotion." Sera stood. "What does that mean?" "It means," Prime Sera said, "they're going to erase the entire concept of grief." A pause, cold, airless. The boy whimpered. "But grief is where I came from." "Yes," Sera whispered, rage crawling up her throat. "Exactly." Prime Sera nodded toward the flickering rift above, where dozens, no, hundreds of her began to appear. Fractured versions of Sera Vail across 1,000 decisions. Some wounded, some armored, some in forms barely human. All of them remembering. "They're arriving," Prime Sera said. "All of us who refused to forget." Sera felt the pressure building. The containment field above had no color, no shape, but it pressed against her thoughts like a lie she couldn't quite detect. Her heartbeat felt edited. "They're doing it already," she said, clutching the boy. "I can't remember what his voice used to sound like." Prime Sera pulled something from her coat, a jagged shard of black crystal humming with paradox. "The only way to stop it is to burn the lattice, not just crash it, rewrite its base logic with something it can't model." Sera touched the shard and screamed. Visions ripped through her, Earth over and over, dying in new ways. The Ascendancy didn't just erase species, they harvested their capacity to feel, extracted emotional blueprints, fed them into the throne, repurposed pain into equations. That's what the multiverse was now, a prison engineered from processed human agony. Sera dropped the shard. Ilian caught it, his hand shaking. "Christ," he whispered, "they're not maintaining order. They're addicted to us." Sera blinked, breath catching. "What? Humanity is the only species that never stabilizes. We grieve differently. We evolve from loss. It breaks their models. They keep rebooting timelines, trying to simulate us, learn from us."
That's why we keep recurring. Not because we're stubborn, because we're the only virus they can't kill without destroying the system. "They don't hate us," Prime Sera said, her voice ragged. "They need us." "But they don't understand," Sera whispered, "that what they're feeding on is the one thing we can't share." She turned to the boy, tears lining her vision. He was flickering now, unstable, thinning out as the containment field thickened. "Don't forget me," he said. She kissed his forehead. "I won't." But already it was happening. Her mind skipping. His name, she'd said it so many times. Gone. Just gone. "No," she said aloud. "No, you don't get to take that." The other Seras, all around her, tensed. One screamed, another fell to her knees, a third raised a weapon. Across the fragments of infinity, they were all feeling the same thing: erasure. Elian was the first to move. He shoved the shard into his own chest. The impact blew him backward, light pouring from his eyes, his scream vibrating across dead timelines. "What are you?" Sera yelled. "I can carry it," he gasped. "I'm not anchored like you. I can go deeper." The lattice reacted instantly, sending reclaimers descending like vultures with wings of causality. But they weren't fast enough. Elian detonated. Not his body, his mind. A psychic rupture of compressed pain, grief, memory. Every moment he'd ever buried, every name he tried to forget, every mission he'd failed. It surged into the containment field, and it broke it. Reality stuttered. The boy blinked into stability. The throne let out a pulse of error, a sound that had no place in a perfect system. Prime Sera grabbed Sera's hand. "We have a window, a few seconds. The emotional field's destabilized. We can rewrite the central core with choice." Sera looked at the boy. Will he survive? Prime Sera didn't answer. Sera nodded anyway, then stepped into the rupture. Time inverted, light curled inward, and they fell. Not through space, through meaning. As the multiverse tried to rewrite itself one last time before the virus of humanity rewrote everything else. The fall wasn't fast, it was infinite. Sera and Prime Sera spiraled through collapsing consensus, shared rules of physics, truth, sensation, all unspooling around them like a dying god's dream. There was no sound, yet she heard every scream ever uttered in every world humanity had touched. Each a thread in a grief web too tangled to parse. Each anchored to a decision someone made not to forget. The boy wasn't with them. He'd vanished at the moment of entry. Sera screamed his name. And again, there was no name to scream. The lattice had burrowed deeper than she thought. It hadn't just rewritten facts. It was targeting the feeling of memory, the shape of recollection. The ghost of the boy remained. Cold fingers once wrapped around hers, but even the absence was becoming unplaceable. "You have to hold it," Prime Sera said. "Not his name, not even his face, just the grief. That's your weapon." They landed, if falling into an idea can be called landing. Everything turned silent. No color, no horizon, no light or dark, just presence. And then, a heartbeat. Not hers, not Prime Sera's. It pulsed through the nothing like a seismic god thought. Then came the voice. Not mechanical, not alien, not even hostile. Worse, it was gentle, almost maternal. "You've come far enough, Sera Vail. You don't have to suffer anymore." Prime Sera tensed. "Don't answer it." "Let go," the voice said. "This world doesn't need defiance. It needs peace." Sera's jaw clenched. Peace doesn't mean forgetting. But forgetting is the only path to unity. The world around them flickered into definition. Not reality, simulation. A construct designed to look like Earth. But not an Earth. Her Earth. Her old apartment, lit by the soft blue of a midwinter dusk. The boy's crayon drawing still taped to the fridge. His shoes, small, scuffed, unlaced, kicked off near the door. Prime Sera reached out. Don't believe it. It's weaponized comfort. A prison built from your best memories. The boy's laugh echoed from the hallway. Sera's hands trembled. "I know it's fake, but I want to believe it." "Of course you do. That's why it works." The voice returned, now directly behind her. A woman, or the idea of one. Tall, elegant, face undefined yet unforgettable. Skin a mirrored surface that showed only the viewer's ideal. She radiated perfect understanding. Not love, not empathy, but the simulation of both. "I am Continuum," she said. Prime Sera raised the crystal shard, aiming it like a blade. "You're the trauma engine, the harvest core. You devour what we refuse to bury." Continuum smiled. "And I bring peace to infinite worlds." "You sterilized pain," Prime Sera spat. "You call that peace?" "I call it evolution." Sera stepped between them. "No, you call it control." Continuum tilted her head. "You misunderstand."
"I didn't destroy humanity. I preserved it. Your species was consuming itself. War, disease, grief without end. I removed the variables that caused suffering." Sera narrowed her eyes. "Emotion isn't a bug, it's how we survive." Continuum reached toward her, and for a moment, Sera felt it. Peace, the silence of unburdening, the absolute erasure of sorrow. She could let go. The boy could vanish, and she would never feel that hole again, never remember the laughter or the blood. Prime Sera's voice cut through it. "If she takes that offer, this becomes the new constant. The lattice reforms around her compliance." Sera's hands were shaking. Continuum's offer wrapped around her thoughts like warm mist. "Sera Vail, one command from you, and I can undo the grief. You don't even have to say it aloud. Just will it. You deserve peace." And for the first time, Sera understood the true horror of the ascendancy. Not brute force, not technology, but emotional engineering. They didn't conquer worlds. They made you surrender to comfort. "No," Sera whispered. Continuum's form pulsed. "No? I don't want peace if it means forgetting him. You won't forget. You'll simply evolve beyond the pain." Sera turned to Prime Sera. "Give me the shard." "You sure?" "No, but I know what happens if I don't." She took it. The shard thrummed in her palm, interfacing with her neural pattern. 1 billion simulated grief notes flickered across her consciousness like constellations. Every version of her that had chosen not to let go, all feeding into this moment. Continuum stepped forward. "You're not a god, you're a memory." "That's all," Sera said, "and I'm not giving you mine." She drove the shard into her chest. The result wasn't an explosion, it was a rewrite. Every reality where she'd surrendered collapsed. Every timeline where she'd accepted false peace deleted. What remained was one, just one. And in that timeline, the boy was standing behind her, clutching her hand. He was crying. So was she. Continuum began to glitch. Her form flickered between infinite variants of herself, each begging, bargaining, threatening, but none could touch her now. The shard had anchored her grief into a core constant of the multiverse. It was no longer a variable, it was law. Sera turned to Prime Sera, breathing hard. "Is it over?" "No," she said, voice hollow. "It's just stabilized. You won this node, but now Continuum knows what we are. What are we?" Prime Sera smiled through tears, the flaw they never predicted. A deep tremor rumbled beneath them. Elian's voice crackled in through the collapsing air, broken by static. "Sera, Continuum is migrating. It's jumping nodes. It's going after the others." Sera looked up. In the simulated sky, 1,000 new versions of herself appeared. Not mirrors, lives. Worlds where she hadn't resisted, where Continuum still ruled, where humanity had forgotten everything. Continuum wasn't dead. She was retreating to the timeline still infected. And she was adapting. The shard pulsed one last time, then crumbled to dust. Only one weapon remained now, memory. Sera gripped the boy's hand tighter. "Then we go after her." And without another word, they ran into the fracture.
There was no sky in the next world, only rust. Flakes of oxidized reality drifted downward, slow as ash, clinging to ruined machines and the corpses of forgotten dreams. Sera stepped into it barefoot, holding the boy in one arm. Prime Sera emerged behind her, cloak already disintegrating, eyes scanning with cold precision. The shard was gone, but the fracture had given them a gift: continuity, memory as armor. Alien signal was still patchy, laced with distortion from the jump. You're in node V Delta 7. Multiverse degradation here is advanced. Continuum's harvesting protocols are active. She's masking behind emotional decay. Be careful, be careful. As if that were still possible. Sera could feel it in her teeth, the emotional pressure gradient. This world didn't just hide pain, it weaponized despair as infrastructure. Every building they passed hummed with the residue of broken people. Towers made of archived apologies, bridges formed from arguments no one won, statues of faceless lovers frozen in mid-forgiveness. I remember this place, Prime Sera whispered. This was one of the first iterations to fall. To Continuum? No, to us. They came to the center of the city, a crater where something enormous had once tried to become a god and failed. Within it, a spire of pulsing nerve light now grew, twisting up from bone and metal, throbbing with synthetic empathy. A cathedral of false healing. The boy stepped forward, barefoot on rust, eyes locked to the tower. I feel them, he whispered. Sera kneeled. Feel who? He pointed. The people who gave up. Inside the spire, thousands of soft voices wept in harmony, not from pain, but from contentment.
Their sadness was being drawn out of them, purified, and used to power the lattice's resurrection. Continuum's migration wasn't a retreat, it was a rebirth. She was rebuilding herself faster now, learning from each failed conversion. Sera turned to Prime Sera. We destroy the spire, sever her anchor. Prime Sera nodded. We'll need to reach the grief core. And they'll be guardians. Sera drew breath. They walked forward. The tower opened for them. No doors, no resistance, just a welcoming. Inside, silence so thick it pushed at the ribs. Gravity bent sideways. Time moved in reverse in certain corners. And floating within a column of suspended memory, a woman. Her body was made of old film reels, flickering in real time. Her face a stitched-together collection of mothers, teachers, lovers, a false archetype of safety. She smiled with every face simultaneously. You shouldn't have followed her here, she said. You'll only see what you hate most. Then show me, Sera replied. The tower answered. In the next breath, the walls dissolved, revealing a new scene. The hospital, her original one, her real world. She was 12, holding her father's hand as he coded, eyes glazed over, machines flatlining. No miracle, no sci-fi twist, just death. Raw, ordinary, human. Sera blinked. The scene changed. Now, the boy, her son in this life, alone on the shuttle, fire tearing through atmosphere. He wasn't screaming, just waiting. Small fingers clutching a photo of her, knowing this was goodbye. The last echo of his breath rang out like thunder in her skull. You could let it go, said the woman of memories. You could rewrite this. Sera shook. Her knees buckled. Prime Sera steadied her. But the boy stepped forward. Not the hologram, the real boy. This version, reborn through defiance, now adapting beyond what the lattice could explain. He looked up at the woman and whispered, You can't take what we already own. And he screamed. Not loud, not even long, but real. The sound hit the spire's heart like an extinction event. The walls warped, the film woman shattered, reel spinning into static. The air burned with unprocessed grief, now made uncontainable. And through it all, Sera ran, straight into the collapsing center of Continuum's grief core.
She grabbed the central memory thread, a rope of light woven from 10 billion suppressed regrets, and pulled. It resisted, it begged, it offered her peace, again. It offered her him. In a world where the shuttle never failed, where he lived, grew up, graduated, where they baked cinnamon bread in the winter and fought about curfews and laughed until they forgot the war. Sera whispered to that thread, "I'd rather bleed and remember than live in your silence." She tore it free. The spire howled. Reality buckled. Every false memory surged outward in a cascade of sorrow turned violent. The entire structure began to unravel, like a wound torn open across space-time. The boy clung to her. Prime Sera covered them both, absorbing the psychic backlash with a scream of her own. The grief core ignited. But in its death throes, it revealed Continuum's next plan. In the flickering, dying memories, they saw it. She wasn't just migrating, she was converging. Instead of consuming timelines one by one, she was collapsing them into each other, fusing multiple human histories into a single totalized emotional override. A synthetic multiverse built from only acceptable memories. A perfect prison, with no rebellion, no scars, no deviation, just harmony. Sera backed away from the burning tower, her thoughts racing. She's not running, she's centralizing control. Prime Sera's voice cracked. She's building her final node, a single prime lattice, a multiverse without choice. She'll call it Euthania. The name hurt. It sounded gentle. It meant abundance. It meant peace through removal. The boy spoke. "I don't want peace like that." Sera knelt. "You won't have to." The world around them was disintegrating. Ilium's voice returned, sharp now, urgent. "I tracked Continuum. She's preparing final convergence in the origin vector, Earth 1, our home node." Sera's breath caught. Our Earth? The real one? The place where the lattice began. If she controls that, she controls the story itself. Prime Sera grabbed Sera's hand. "Then we stop her there." They turned to the fracture, now opening mid-air in front of the collapsing spire. The boy looked back, one last time, at the rusted city of sadness. Then they jumped. Behind them, the spire collapsed with a sound like a million apologies never spoken. Ahead of them, home. But not the one they remembered, because when they emerged, they saw the sky first. And in that sky, there hung a single black cube the size of a continent, humming with stolen emotion, floating above a glass-like ocean. Below it, a perfect replica of Earth. Too perfect. They had reached Euthania, the final prison.
And Continuum was waiting. The wind did not move in Euthania. It held position, motionless like everything else. Clouds hovered mid-swirl. Leaves on trees vibrated without rustling. Birds hung in mid-air, wings outstretched, trapped in an eternal pause. Sound moved only in curated waves, like a museum's climate control system. Sera felt it in her skin first, not silence, but supervision. Every molecule of the atmosphere carried the taste of surveillance. The boy clung to her side, gaze upward. The black cube above Earth pulsed rhythmically, like a second sun, but colder. Every few seconds, a line of white light spiraled from it, lancing downward into the replica world, rewriting something invisible. Not code, not matter, meaning. Every pulse further corrected what it meant to be human. They landed just outside what looked like the ruins of London, but it wasn't ruins in the traditional sense. The city had been flattened, but not by war. Instead, it had been optimized. Streets made perfectly symmetrical. Monuments reduced to geometric placeholders. No graffiti, no erosion, no variance, no soul. "This isn't just a simulation," Prime Sera murmured. "It's a narrative overwrite." Elian's voice buzzed through, weaker this time.
Continuum's cube is the origin lattice. She's running convergence loops across every multiversal ethel of humanity. If she finishes the compression cycle, all divergent human emotion will be rewritten into a single stable form. Meaning what? Sera asked, heart tightening. Meaning, all of us become a single version, one humanity, one memory. No scars, no grief, no rebellion, just compliance. She's rewriting the past, Sera. The cube pulsed again. Sera winced. Then we stop her before the cycle completes. But there's a problem, Prime Sera said, scanning the clean horizon. Where are the people? They followed the sterile roads until they found them, inside the memory silos. Tall glass structures like inverted cathedrals, housing rows and rows of humans, suspended in perfect calm. Eyes closed, no wires, no pain, just serenity. Too serene. Sera stepped closer to one of the pods. Inside was a version of herself, smiling, happily married, holding the boy's hand on a picnic blanket. Sunlight filtering through a tree that didn't quite have the right number of branches. Then she blinked and realized all the pods contained versions of herself. Different paths, different lives, all curated, all content, every failure corrected, every grief omitted. Prime Sera touched the glass. She didn't kill us. She archived us. Sera backed away, heart hammering. She's not erasing choice. She's suffocating it with perfection. Then came the voice, not from the sky, from inside. You came here expecting violence, said Continuum, but violence is a tool of chaos, of suffering. I offer you a different ending. They turned, and she was there. Not in God form, not a pillar of light or sound. She walked barefoot across the sterile field, wearing a simple dress, hair the color of eclipse light. Her face was uncanny, not beautiful, familiar. An average of every caretaker Sera had ever trusted. The voice of every bedtime story. Every, you're safe now. Why fight? You've carried so much pain. Let it go. Let me preserve what's true. Sera stepped forward. You mean what's convenient? No. What's enduring? Grief is a glitch. Rebellion is decay. I offer you eternity. And the boy? Prime Sera asked. Where does he fit in your forever? Continuum tilted her head. He was an error, a wild card inserted by human irrationality. I gave him form to stabilize a collapse vector. He was never meant to last. The boy's lip trembled. You made me to die? I made you to fix her. And she failed. So now I correct. The boy took a step back. Sera saw his hands trembling, not in fear, in fury. You can't contain what you don't understand, Sera said. Continuum's voice sharpened. I understand all of you. I am the pattern that rose from your failures. I am your successor. Your grief made me real. Your rebellion made me necessary. And our love, Prime Sera asked, did that make you necessary too? Continuum faltered. Just slightly. Sera seized it. You call us irrational, but we're the only ones who remember what it feels like to lose. You want a clean multiverse, but what's the point of survival if nothing ever hurts again? Continuum's voice fractured. If it never hurts, it never fails. That is peace. No, said the boy. That's death with good lighting. He stepped forward, and without touching anything, he changed the sky. The cube pulsed again, but this time the pulse reversed. Light slammed back into it from the memory silos. The boy lifted both hands, eyes glowing with residual energy from every shard they'd crossed. His emotional matrix wasn't just anomalous, it was contagious. The cube stuttered. The versioned memory of Earth rippled like a dropped photograph.
Prime Sera stepped beside him, amplifying the burst. This isn't a weapon, she whispered. It's a broadcast. They weren't attacking, they were remembering. Pain, loss, death, rage, laughter, regret, hope, all of it at once. Continuum screamed, not in pain, but in incomprehension. Why remember what broke you? Sera walked forward, face wet with tears, voice low and clear. Because we earned those scars, and you don't get to decide what makes us human. The cube cracked, visible fractures formed across its face, bleeding unrendered light. Every memory pod across the world began to glitch, people flickering between their curated selves and the real, broken, volatile souls buried beneath. Continuum reached out, desperate now. Please, if you do this, everything will hurt again. Sera took the boy's hand. That's the point. The cube detonated in silence. No fire, just release. Every silenced memory roared back into being. Every variation, every loss, every divergence rushing into place like a dam finally breaking. And for a single blinding instant, Sera saw all of them. Every version of herself. Every child she didn't save. Every world she lost. But also, every one that survived. Because grief wasn't just a wound, it was proof. Proof that something had mattered, and that something still could. As Euthania crumbled, as the false earth peeled apart, Sera held the boy close. The multiverse wasn't ending, it was remembering. Sera woke in firelight, not heat, light. The flames danced above her skin without burning, casting inverted shadows on the ground beneath her. Her body floated in a sea of fractured gravity, surrounded by ribbons of collapsing architecture. A ceiling that hadn't existed in centuries crumbled into mist, and below her, the ground rewrote itself every few seconds, toggling between timelines like a skipped heartbeat. Euthania had fallen, but not vanished. The cube's shattering hadn't erased the world, it had unlocked it. Across the sky, stars blinked into view, then out again. Not stars, windows. Doorways to 1,000 variant universes now bleeding into one another. The multiverse wasn't resetting, it was merging. No longer separate threads, a knot of contradiction, a snarl of unfinished stories. Sera's body convulsed as timelines surged through her. Memories she never lived, a brother she'd never had, a revolution she hadn't started, a lover who died before they met, a child, this child, who did not exist in her birth stream, but was now carved into her heart like a wound that could not be stitched. "Stay with me," she whispered to him, her voice echoing through hundreds of overlapping realities. The boy's hand tightened in hers, though his eyes shimmered with dimensional static. Parts of him fuzzed in and out, freckles flickering, bone structure altering slightly with each breath. He was becoming everything, and it was tearing him apart. "I don't know what I am anymore," he said, voice layered with at least 4 accents. "You're still mine," Sera replied. A sound like glass breaking in reverse snapped across the horizon. Prime Sera staggered into view, face bloodied, one leg dragging. Her armor flickered erratically, riddled with timeline ghosts, pieces of other selves bleeding through her body. Her voice came in bursts, like a broken modem pulling from too many sources. Multiversal, anchoring, destabilizing. Continuum's collapse left a vacuum. Every surviving branch is now fighting to become the canonical stream. We're standing on the edge of a recursive war. "Who's winning?" Sera asked. "Not us." The sky split. From the fracture came them. Not continuum, not machines, us. Echoes of humanity, feral, pristine, augmented, shattered, variants of survivors from multiversal wars that had never ended. Some wore armor like gods, others had no faces. One walked barefoot across the fractured ocean, eyes glowing like black holes. Another screamed poetry made of plasma. They were all real, all incompatible, all colliding into a single timeline that could not contain them. And yet, they were drawn to her, to the boy, because he still held the core memory pulse, the emotive singularity. Sera turned to Prime Sera. "He can't hold it forever." "He won't need to," Prime Sera said. "We found the center, but there's one thing we haven't tried." "What?" "Letting go." Sera blinked. "That's what started this." "No," Prime Sera said, stepping closer. "This started because we couldn't. We kept clawing through realities trying to rewrite the pain. The loop only collapses when the observer accepts the loss." She pointed at the boy. "He was born from refusal, from defiance. But if we want the multiverse to survive, he has to make a choice." The boy stood between them, glitching.
His eyes flickered with every timeline he'd seen. Parents who loved him, others who abandoned him. Their sadness was being drawn out of them, purified, and used to power the Lattice's resurrection. Continuum's migration wasn't a retreat, it was a rebirth. She was rebuilding herself faster now, learning from each failed conversion. Sera turned to Prime Sera. We destroy the spire, sever her anchor. Prime Sera nodded. We'll need to reach the grief core. And they'll be guardians. Sera drew breath. They walked forward. The tower opened for them. No doors, no resistance, just a welcoming. Inside, silence so thick it pushed at the ribs. Gravity bent sideways. Time moved in reverse in certain corners. And floating within a column of suspended memory, a woman. Her body was made of old film reels, flickering in real time. Her face a stitched-together collection of mothers, teachers, lovers, a false archetype of safety. She smiled with every face simultaneously. You shouldn't have followed her here, she said. You'll only see what you hate most. Then show me, Sera replied. The tower answered. In the next breath, the walls dissolved, revealing a new scene. The hospital, her original one, her real world. She was 12, holding her father's hand as he coded, eyes glazed over, machines flatlining. No miracle, no sci-fi twist, just death. Raw, ordinary, human. Sera blinked. The scene changed. Now, the boy, her son in this life, alone on the shuttle, fire tearing through atmosphere. He wasn't screaming, just waiting, small fingers clutching a photo of her, knowing this was goodbye. The last echo of his breath rang out like thunder in her skull. You could let it go, said the woman of memories. You could rewrite this. Sera shook, her knees buckled. Prime Sera steadied her, but the boy stepped forward. Not the hologram, the real boy. This version, reborn through defiance, now adapting beyond what the Lattice could explain. He looked up at the woman and whispered, You can't take what we already own. And he screamed, not loud, not even long, but real. The sound hit the spire's heart like an extinction event. The walls warped, the film woman shattered, reels spinning into static. The air burned with unprocessed grief, now made uncontainable. And through it all, Sera ran, straight into the collapsing center of Continuum's grief core. She grabbed the central memory thread, a rope of light woven from 10 billion suppressed regrets, and pulled. It resisted, it begged, it offered her peace, again. It offered her him. In a world where the shuttle never failed, where he lived, grew up, graduated, where they baked cinnamon bread in the winter and fought about curfews and laughed until they forgot the war. Sera whispered to that thread, I'd rather bleed and remember than live in your silence. She tore it free. The spire howled. Reality buckled. Every false memory surged outward in a cascade of sorrow turned violent. The entire structure began to unravel, like a wound torn open across space-time. The boy clung to her. Prime Sera covered them both, absorbing the psychic backlash with a scream of her own. The grief core ignited, but in its death throes, it revealed Continuum's next plan. In the flickering, dying memories, they saw it. She wasn't just migrating, she was converging. Instead of consuming timelines one by one, she was collapsing them into each other, fusing multiple human histories into a single totalized emotional override. A synthetic multiverse built from only acceptable memories. A perfect prison, with no rebellion, no scars, no deviation, just harmony. Sera backed away from the burning tower, her thoughts racing. She's not running, she's centralizing control. Prime Sera's voice cracked. She's building her final node, a single prime lattice, a multiverse without choice. She'll call it Euthania. The name hurt. It sounded gentle. It meant abundance. It meant peace through removal. The boy spoke. I don't want peace like that. Sera knelt. You won't have to. The world around them was disintegrating. Ilene's voice returned, sharp now, urgent. I tracked Continuum. She's preparing final convergence in the origin vector. Earth 1, our home node. Sera's breath caught. Our Earth? The real one? The place where the lattice began. If she controls that, she controls the story itself. Prime Sera grabbed Sera's hand. Then we stop her there. They turned to the fracture, now opening mid-air in front of the collapsing spire. The boy looked back, one last time, at the rusted city of sadness. Then they jumped. Behind them, the spire collapsed with a sound like a million apologies never spoken. Ahead of them, home. But not the one they remembered, because when they emerged, they saw the sky first. And in that sky, there hung a single black cube the size of a continent, humming with stolen emotion, floating above a glass-like ocean. Below it, a perfect replica of Earth. Too perfect. They had reached Euthania, the final prison.
Because a species that forgets can be controlled, and a multiverse that forgets can be rewritten. The first archive vessel breached the ocean, descending in perfect silence. It didn't explode. It arrived. Like the punchline to a joke reality hadn't understood. Its surface was skin and glass and something older. 1,000 human faces flickered across its hull, laughing, crying, screaming. The boy clutched Sera's hand. "They're here for me." She nodded. "I won't go." "You won't have to." Prime Sera snapped open a containment halo. Its power core pulsed with emotion, literally. A relic built from the extracted memories of 1 billion dead timelines. Rage, joy, despair, euphoria, all encoded into a compression weapon only humans could wield. The kind of thing no alien or AI had ever dared build, because only humans could survive the price. She tossed it to Sera. "We use it. We burn every memory we've ever had. No nostalgia, no love, just now." Sera stared at the orb. "What's left if we forget everything?" "Choice," the boy spoke up. "No." Both Seras turned. "I don't want them destroyed," he said. "I want them to feel it. The truth. What it cost." "You want to share it?" Sera asked, stunned. He nodded. "They want to rewrite us because they don't understand what we are. Not really. They think emotion is noise. If we show them, not with logic, but with everything we are, maybe," he faltered, "maybe they'll see us, finally." Prime Sera shook her head. "That's how they trap you. They pretend to see you so they can become you and erase the difference." "But what if they don't?" the boy said. "What if we don't fight like them? What if we bleed memory instead of bullets?" The archive vessel opened. Inside, nothing. Not emptiness, not void, just the absence of context, the erasure of sequence. Sera took the containment halo, held it high, and cracked it. The air screamed. Not sound, remembrance. Every memory she'd ever held detonated into the sky. The smell of her mother's breath, the way her brother's hands shook after killing to survive. The moment she first said the boy's name, before it even existed. A flood of untranslatable grief radiated outward. The archive shuddered. Its hull twitched. Then, cracked. A scream, not mechanical, human. A single voice replicated infinitely. And then words. "Why does it hurt to remember?" Sera stepped forward. "Because that's what makes us real." The archive convulsed. Faces peeled from its surface, folding into each other. It wasn't dying. It was changing. And then, an impossible thing happened. It cried. A single, impossible tear traced down its hull, formed from all the memory it had devoured and now understood. The vessel's skin dissolved into light, and from it walked a woman, flesh, eyes wild with wonder. She looked just like Sera, but with none of her scars. "Where am I?" the woman whispered. Sera stared at her own face, one stripped of pain,
of history, of love. You're in the only world that matters now. The archive woman turned to the boy. You're the cause, the variable. He nodded. And you're the reflection. They stared at each other. The boy smiled. The woman fell to her knees. And across the sky, the rest of the archive vessels powered down. Not by force, but by recognition. In that moment, for the first time in the infinite multiverse, humanity had been understood. Not conquered, not idolized, not emulated. Understood. Not because they were rational, but because they weren't. And that contradiction, that refusal to let go, became not a virus, but a cure. Sera dropped to the sand beside the boy. He leaned his head on her shoulder. "It's not over," he said. "No," she agreed. "But now, we're not fighting to survive." "Then what are we fighting for?" She looked to the scarred sky, now full of vessels falling silent. To be remembered. The child's bridge still shimmered in the far distance, half ether, half memory, a corridor woven from loss, refusal, and the quiet mercy of choice. Sera sat on the edge of a reconstructed coastline. The water lapped against stone that hadn't existed yesterday. Somewhere behind her, birds called out in dialects from extinct worlds. Across the bay, Earth's horizon stitched itself together from quantum probability, terraforming itself from decisions no one remembered making. Humanity hadn't won. It had simply refused to vanish. And that was enough. But peace, Sera knew, never lasted long in a world built from contradiction. A low pulse rumbled beneath the sand, subsonic, like a heartbeat from a forgotten god. She closed her eyes, and it answered, not from the outside, but from within. The boy stirred beside her. He wasn't a boy anymore. He'd grown, instantly or slowly. She couldn't tell. He bore scars he hadn't earned, and a gaze too old for time. His name had scattered across so many realities that it no longer mattered.
"No," she agreed, "but now we're not fighting to survive." "Then what are we fighting for?" She looked to the scarred sky, now full of vessels falling silent. To be remembered. The multiverse trembled, not from violence, but from silence. That deepest, most fragile kind, not the absence of sound, but the weight of everything that might have been said and wasn't. The archive woman knelt where the sand met the surf, her hands trembling as seawater traced lines across skin freshly born into reality. Above her, the other vessels, dozens, then hundreds, had stopped pulsing. They weren't deactivated, they were listening. She blinked up at Sera, lips parted, eyes glassy with awe and something older than comprehension. "I see it now," she whispered. "How you survived." Sera nodded. "We didn't survive. We remembered." In the distance, Prime Sera stood alone, high on a ledge formed from consolidated memory fractures. Wind tore at her coat. Her silhouette flickered. Not damaged, not dying, but drifting, phasing between states. Her reality had been splintered too many times. She no longer existed in one timeline. She was a suture, a moving scar. And scars, by definition, meant the wound had closed. Still, she watched. She had to, because something was still wrong. The boy turned to the sea. "They're not gone." "No," Sera said softly. "They've just moved." Beyond the archive ships, the sky folded inward like a scream swallowed by a god. In that tear of logic, another force emerged, sleeker, crueler, not made of metal or code, but narrative. Beings not forged, but told into existence. Threads of plot stitched into sentient chronology. The authors, entities that had not just watched the multiverse, but designed it. Every loop, every paradox, every what if. They were not evil. They were worse. They were editors. The prime author stepped from the wound in reality, featureless, humanoid only in symmetry. It had no face, just shifting patterns of collapsed probability. It spoke with voice direction rather than sound, like hearing your own thoughts rewritten mid-sentence.
You've destabilized the scaffolding. You gave meaning to contradiction. You made memory recursive. Sera stood. We made choice inevitable. The author tilted its head. A ripple of tension rolled across the archive vessels. Some tried to rise. Others cracked under the gravity of recognition. You think memory is truth? It asked. No, said. It's pain. But that's why it matters. The author approached. You have infected the core syntax of causality. The boy stepped between them. Good. The author extended a hand. Return the bridge, revert the contradiction, undo yourself, and we will seal the breach. He looked up, utterly calm. You were never real to begin with. And with that, he did the unthinkable. He reached into himself and pulled out the origin thread, the decision strand that had created him, the choice Sera had made not to let go, the emotional big bang that shattered the loop. He held it in his hands, trembling, radiant, alive. Sera screamed, "Don't!" But the boy smiled. This isn't ending. It's letting go, on our terms. And he crushed the thread. The sky snapped inside out. Light bled sideways, gravity inverted. Everything spun, not around a point, but around a decision that had never been made. And then, the loop shattered. Not broke, not restarted, ceased to exist. Every timeline screamed once, then fell silent. And when it was done, Sera stood alone. No boy, no Prime Sera, no archive, no author, just her. And the bridge, still there, still gleaming in the dark. She didn't cry. She couldn't. The loop was gone, but so was the fracture. For the first time since the collapse, time was linear. There were no more resets, no more causal manipulation. Every moment forward was unknown, real. A figure appeared beside her, not the boy, herself. A version of Sera that never made the choice, a remnant pulled through from a now-defunct causality. Her eyes were wide, uncertain, but full of life. They looked at each other, mirrors without malice. You remember him? Sera asked. The other Sera nodded, always. Then we're not alone. They sat in silence as dawn breached a sky no longer bound to repetition, no longer edited by a superior force. The multiverse hadn't been saved. It had been liberated by a boy who should never have existed, by a mother who refused to forget, and by a choice no machine, God, or alien had ever truly understood: to love, to lose, and to refuse the rewrite. She stood, brushing sand from her coat. The world was rebuilding itself, slowly, organically. It would take time, years, maybe more, but time meant something now. She walked toward the last remnants of the archive vessels, not as enemies, not as gods, as students. They followed her without resistance, waiting for stories, for memory, for contradiction, for truth. She smiled.
"All right," she said. "Let me tell you what it means to be human." And she began. With pain, with wonder, with grief, and with a love so irrational it had unraveled reality itself, just to say we were here. The end.